Hello, my lovelies. Welcome to Amanda's Crafty Corner. I'm Amanda, and this is my Crafty Corner. Well, today is Thursday, and that means it is another 5stitch day where we are working on my Christmas train. I hope everybody is having a wonderful week, a wonderful day. I hope you are all staying safe and warm. I am doing my voiceover on Tuesday morning. But you'll get this on Thursday. It is, if anybody is curious to know, I believe it is minus 22, which I can't remember what it is in Fahrenheit. Either way, you're also in the minuses if you really want to know. It is freezing cold. Yay for it being cold, right? Monday we ended up with snow day, so I still went to work. Um, my little man stayed home with my dad and he watched him all day. Apparently, they had a party here, even though we all know I trust my dad is about as far as I can throw him, which is not very far, but I had no choice this time. Because again, yay, snow day. If anybody is wondering, the snow piles outside of my house are almost as tall as me, and I'm 5'1". Yeah, that's how crazy it is. But anyways, like I said, we are working on this lovely cross stitch by 5stitch, and we will be continuing on with Alice in Wonderland. I'm not gonna lie, at this point I was struggling with my threads. But anyways, grab a drink, grab a craft. If you are driving, well, listen in to this wonderful story. We are working on a new color today as well. I'm working on, um, it's a, I'm going to say it's a turquoise background with a black circle, and then we're continuing on with the bottom portion. I'm hoping to get the bottom portion done soon so we can actually get up into the train, but we shall see. Anyways, please let me know in the comments below what you're working on. If you are working on anything, and let me know if you also saw my diamond art finish, which I'm actually going to hopefully be sending out to my friend soon. I just have to get like a poo noodle or something to roll it up and then find boxes and stuff to put it in so that it doesn't get damaged. But anyways, let's get on with this beautiful read along. And I'm going to do my absolute best when it comes to the rhymes. So we are still on chapter 2, The Garden of Live Flowers. I highlighted where I finished, which is Alice never could quite make out in thinking it over afterwards. How it was that they began? All she remembers is that they were running hand in hand and the queen went so fast and that it was all she could do to keep up with her. And still the queen kept crying faster, faster, but Alice felt she could not go faster, though she had not breath left to say so. The most curious part of the thing was that the trees and the other things round them never changed their places at all. However fast they went, they never seemed to pass anything. I wonder if all the things move along with us, thought poor puzzled Alice. And the queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, "Faster! Don't try to talk!" Not that Alice had any idea of doing that. She felt as if she would never be able to talk again. She was getting so much out of breath, and still the queen cried, "Faster! Faster!" and dragged her along. "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pant out at last. "Nearly there," the queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they ran on for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears, and almost blowing her hair off her head, she fancied. "Now, now!" cried the queen. "Faster, faster!" And they went so fast that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their feet. Till suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground breathlessly and giddy. The queen propped her up against a tree and said kindly, "You may rest a little now." Alice looked around her in great surprise. Why, I do believe we're under the tree Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was." "Of course it is," said the queen. "What would you have of it?" "Well, in our country," said Alice, still panting a little, "you generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing." "A slow sort of country," said the queen. "Now here, you see it. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to go somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that." "I'd rather not try, please," said Alice. "I'm quite content to stay here, only I am so hot and thirsty." "I know what you'd like," the Queen said good naturedly, taking a little box out of her pocket. "Have a biscuit." Alice thought it would not be civil to say no, though it wasn't at all what she wanted. She took it and ate it as well as she could, and it was very dry, and she thought she had never been so nearly choked in all her life. "While you're refreshing yourself," said the Queen, "I'll just take the measurements." And she took a ribbon out of her pocket, marked in inches, and began measuring the ground, and sticking little pegs in here and there. Excuse me, sorry about that. "At the end of 2 yards," she said, putting in a peg to mark the distance, "I shall give you your directions. Have another biscuit?" "No, thank you," said Alice. "One's quite enough." "Thirst quenched, I hope?" said the Queen. Alice did not know what to say to this, but luckily the Queen did not wait for an answer, but went on. "At the end of the 3 yards I shall repeat them, for fear of your forgetting them. At the end of 4 I shall say good bye, and then at the end of 5 I shall go." She had got all the pegs put in by this time, and Alice looked on with great interest as she returned to the tree, and then began slowly walking down the row. At the 2 yard peg she faced round and said, "A pawn goes 2 squares in its first move, you know. So you'll go very quickly through the third square by railway, I should think, and you'll find yourself in the fourth square in no time. Well, that square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The fifth is mostly water. The sixth belongs to Humpty Dumpty. But you make no remark?" I, I didn't know I had to make one just then," Alice faltered out. "You should have said, 'It's extremely kind of you to tell me all this.' However, we'll suppose it said. The seventh square is all forest, however. One of the knights will show you the way, and in the eighth square we shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun." Alice got up and curtsied and sat down again. At the next peg the Queen turned again, and this time she said, "Speak in French when you can't think of the English for a thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are." She did not wait for Alice to curtsy this time, but walked on quickly to the next peg, where she turned for a moment to say good-bye, and then hurried on the last. How it happened Alice never knew, but exactly as she came to the last peg she was gone. Whether she vanished into the air, or whether she ran quickly into the wood, and she can run very fast, thought Alice, there was no way of guessing, but she was gone, and Alice began to remember that she was a pawn, and that it would soon be time for her to move. Chapter 3. Looking Glass Insects. Of course, the first thing to do was to make a grand survey of the country she was going to travel through. "It's something very like learning geography," thought Alice, as she stood on tiptoe in hopes of being able to see a little further. "Principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm on the only one, but I don't think it's got any name. Principal towns, why, what are those creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody ever saw bees a mile off, you know." And for some time she stood silent, watching one of them that was bustling among the flowers, poking its proboscis into them, just as if it was a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but a regular bee. In fact, it was an elephant. As Alice soon found out, though the idea quite took her breath away at first. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages with roofs taken off and stalks put to them, and what quantities of honey they must make. "I think I'll go down, and no, I won't, just yet," she went on, checking herself just as she was beginning to run down the hill, and trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. "It'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away. And what fun it'll be when they ask me how I like my walk. I shall say, 'Oh, I like it well enough.'" Here came the favorite little toss of the head. "Only it was so dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so." "I think I'll go down the other way," she said, after a pause, "and perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get into the third square." So with this excuse she ran down the hill and jumped over the first of the 6 little brooks. tickets, please, said the guard, putting his head in the at the window. In a moment, everybody was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people, and quite seemed to fill the carriage. Now then, show your ticket, child, the guard went on, looking angrily at Alice. And a great many voices all said together, like the chorus of a song, thought Alice. Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute. I'm afraid I haven't got one, Alice said in a frightened tone. There wasn't a ticket office where I was from. And again the chorus of voices went on. There wasn't room for one where she came from. The land there is worth £1,000 an inch. Don't make excuses, said the guard. You should have bought one from the engine driver. And once more the chorus of voices went on. The man that drives the engine. Why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 of a puff. Is worth £1,000 a puff. Alice thought to herself, then there's no use in speaking. The voices didn't join in this time, as she hadn't spoken, but to her great surprise they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. I shall dream about £1,000 tonight. I know I shall, thought Alice. All this time the guard was looking at her, first through a telescope, then through a microscope, and then through an opera glass. At last he said, You're traveling the wrong way, and shut up the window and went away. So young a child, said the gentleman, sitting opposite to her. He was dressed in white paper. Ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name. A goat that was sitting next to the gentleman in white shut his eyes and said in a loud voice, She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet. There was a beetle sitting next to the goat. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers altogether. And as the rule seemed to be that they should speak all in turn, he went on with the She'll have to go back from here as luggage. Alice couldn't see who was sitting beyond the beetle, but a hoarse voice spoke next. Change engines, it said, and was obliged to leave off. It sounds like a horse, Alice thought to herself, and an extremely small voice closer to her ear said, You might make a joke on that, something about horse, and horse, you know. Then a very gentle voice in the distance said, She must be labeled last with care, you know. And after that other voices went on. What a number of people there are in the carriage, thought Alice, saying she must go by post as she's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by the telegraph. She must draw the train herself the rest of the way, and so on. But the gentleman dressed in white paper leaned forwards and whispered in her ear, Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take a return ticket every time the train stops. Indeed I shan't, Alice said rather impatiently. I don't belong to this railway journey at all. I was in a wood just now, and I wish I could get back there. You might make a joke on that, said the little voice closer to her. Something about you would if you could, you know. Don't tease so, said Alice, looking about in vain to see where the voice came from. If you're so anxious to have a joke made, why don't you make one yourself? The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, evidently, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it if it only sigh like other people, she thought. But this was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all if it hadn't come quite close to her ear. The consequence of this was that it tickled her ear very much, and quite took off her thoughts from the unhappiness of the poor little creature. I know you are a friend, the little voice went on, a dear friend and an old friend, and you won't hurt me, though I am an insect. What kind of insect? Alice inquired a little anxiously. What she really wanted to know was whether it could sting or not, but she thought this wouldn't be quite a civil question to ask. What then you don't, the little voice began when it was drowned by a shrill scream from the engine, and everybody jumped up in alarm, Alice among the rest. The horse who had put his head out of the window quite quietly drew it in and said, It's only a brook we have to jump over. Everybody seemed satisfied with this, though Alice felt a little nervous at the idea of trains jumping at all. However, it'll take us into the fourth square. That's some comfort, she said to herself. In another moment she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and in her fright she caught at the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat's beard. I'm just going to take a quick sip of coffee. Okay. But the beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting quietly under a tree while the gnat, for that was the insect she had been talking to, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head and fanning her with its wings. It certainly was a very large gnat, about the size of a chicken, Alice thought, still she couldn't feel nervous with it after they had been talking together so long. And then you don't like all insects, the gnat went on as quietly as nothing happened. I like them when they can talk. None of them ever talk where I come from. What sort of insects do you rejoice in where you come from? The inquired. I don't rejoice in insects at all, Alice explained, because I'm rather afraid of them, at least the large kinds, but I can tell you the names of some of them. Of course they answer to their names, the gnat remarked carelessly. I never knew them to do. What's the use of having their names, the gnat said, if they won't answer to them? No use to them, said Alice, but it's useful to the people who name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have names at all? I can't say, the gnat replied. Further on in the wood, down there, they've got no names. However, go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time. Well, there's the horsefly, Alice began counting off the names on her fingers. All right, said the gnat. Halfway up that bush, you'll see a rocking horsefly if you look. It's made entirely of wood, and it gets about by swinging itself from branch to branch. What does it live on? Alice asked with great curiosity. Sap and sawdust, said the gnat. Go on with the list. Alice looked up to the rocking horsefly with great interest and made up her mind that it must have been just repainted. It looked so bright and sticky, and then she went on. And there's the dragonfly. Look on the branch above your head, said the gnat, and there you'll find a snapdragon-fly. Its body is made of plum pudding, its wings of holly leaves, and its head is a raisin burning in brandy. And what does it live on? Fermented and mince pie, the gnat replied, and it makes its nest in a Christmas box. And then there's the butterfly, Alice went on after she had taken a good look at the insect with its head on fire, and had thought to herself, I wonder if that's the reason insects are so fond of flying into candles, because they want to turn into snapdragon flies. Crawling at your feet, said the gnat. Alice drew her feet back in some alarm. You may observe a bread and butterfly. Its wings are thin slices of bread and butter, its body is a crust, and its head is a lump of sugar. And what does it live on? Weak tea with cream in it. A new difficulty came into Alice's head. Supposing it couldn't find any, she suggested, then it would die, of course. But that must happen very often, Alice remarked thoughtfully. It always happens, said the gnat. After this, Alice was silent for a minute or two, pondering. The gnat amused itself meanwhile by humming round and round her head. At last it settled again and remarked, I suppose you don't want to lose your name. No, indeed, Alice said a little anxiously. And yet I don't know, the gnat went on in a careless tone. Only think how convenient it would be if you could manage to go home without it. For instance, if the governess wanted to call you to your lessons, she would call out, Come here! And there she would have to leave off, because there wouldn't be any name for her to call, and of course you wouldn't have to go, you know. That would never do, I'm sure, said Alice. The governess would never think of excusing me lessons for that. If she couldn't remember my name, she'd call me Miss, as the servants do. Well, if she said Miss and didn't say anything more, the gnat remarked, of course you'd miss your lessons. That's a joke. I wish you had made it. Why do you wish I had made it? Alice asked. It's a very bad one. But the gnat only sighed deeply, while two large tears came rolling down his cheeks. You shouldn't make jokes, Alice said, if it makes you so unhappy. Then came another one of those melancholy sighs. And this time the poor gnat really seemed to have sighed itself away, for when Alice looked up there was nothing whatever to be seen on the twig. And as she was getting quite chilly with sitting still so long, she got up and walked on. She very soon came to an open field with a wood on the other side of it. It looked much darker than the last wood, and Alice felt a little timid about going into it. However, on second thoughts, she made up her mind to go on. For I certainly won't go back, she thought to herself, and this was the only way to the eighth square. This must be the wood, she said thoughtfully to herself, where things have no names. I wonder what'll become of my name when I go in. I shouldn't like to lose it at all, because they'd never have to give me another, and it would be almost certain to be an ugly one. But then the fun would be trying to find the creature that got my old name. That's just like the advertisements, when people lose dogs. Answer to the name of Dash, hat on a brass color. Just fancy calling everything you meet Alice, till one of them answered, only they wouldn't answer at all if they were wise. She was rambling on this way when she reached the wood. It looked very cool and shady. Well, at any rate, it's a great comfort, she said as she stepped under the trees, after being so hot, to get into what? She went on, rather surprised at not being able to think of the word. I mean to get under this, putting her hand on the trunk of the tree. What does it call itself, I wonder? I do believe it's got no name. Why, to be sure it hasn't. She stood silent for a minute, thinking. Then she suddenly began, then it really has happened after all. And now, who am I? I will remember if I can. I'm determined to do it. But being determined didn't help much, and all she could say after a great deal of puzzling is, I, L. I know it begins with L. Just then a fawn came wandering by. It looked at Alice with its large gentle eyes, but didn't seem at all frightened. Here then, Alice said, as she held out her hand and tried to stroke it, but it only started back a little, and then stood looking at her again. What do you call yourself? The fawn said at last. Such a sweet, soft voice it had. I wish I knew, thought poor Alice. She answered rather sadly, nothing just now. Think again, it said. That won't do. Alice thought, but nothing came of it. Please, would you tell me what you call yourself? She said timidly. I think it might help a little. I'll tell you if you'll move a little further on, the fawn said. I can't remember here. So they walked on together through the wood, Alice with her arms clasped lovingly round the soft neck of the fawn, till they came out into another open field. And here the fawn gave a sudden bound into the air, and shook itself free from Alice's arms. I'm a fawn, it cried out in a voice of delight, and dear me, you're a human child. A sudden look of alarm came into its beautiful brown eyes, and in another moment it had darted away at full speed. Alice stood looking after it, almost ready to cry with vexation at having lost her dear little fellow traveller so suddenly. However, I know my name now, she said. That's some comfort. Alice, Alice, I won't forget it again. And now which of these finger posts ought I to follow, I wonder? It was not a very difficult question to answer, as there was only one road through the wood, and the two finger posts both printed along it. I'll settle it, Alice said to herself, when the road divides and they point different ways. But this did not seem likely to happen. She went on and on a long way. But wherever the road divided there were sure to be two finger posts pointing to the same way. One marked "To Tweedledum's house," and the other "To the house of Tweedledee." I do believe, said Alice at last, that they live in the same house. I wonder I never thought of that before. But I can't stay there long. I'll just call and say, how do you do, and ask them the way out of the wood. If I could only get to the eighth square before it gets dark. So she wandered on, talking to herself as she went, till on turning a sharp corner she came upon two fat little men, so suddenly that she could not help starting back. But in another moment she recovered herself, feeling sure that they must be. Sorry, I'm going to take another sip of my coffee. Chapter 4: Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They were standing under a tree, each with an arm around the other's neck, and Alice knew which was which in a moment, because one of them had "Dum" embroidered on his collar and the other "D." I suppose they've each got Tweedle around at the back of the collar, she said to herself. They stood so still that she quite forgot they were alive, and she was just looking round to see if the word Tweedle was written at the back of each collar, when she was startled by a voice coming from the one marked "Dumb." If you think we're waxworks, he said. You ought to pay, you know. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing, nohow. Contrariwise, added the one marked D, if you think we're alive, you ought to speak. I'm sure I'm very sorry, was all Alice could say, for the words of the old song kept ringing through her head like the ticking of a clock, and she could hardly help saying them out loud. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, for Tweedledum said Tweedledee had spoiled his nice new rattle. Just then flew down a monstrous crow, as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. I know what you're thinking about, said Tweedledum, but it isn't so, nohow. Contrariwise, continued Tweedledee, if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be. But as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic. I was thinking, said Alice said very politely, which is the best way out of this wood. It's getting so dark. Would you tell me, please? But the little men only looked at each other and grinned. They looked so exactly like a couple of great schoolboys that Alice couldn't help pointing her finger at Tweedledum and saying, First boy. No how, Tweedledum cried out briskly, and shut his mouth up again with a snap. Next boy, said Alice, passing on to Tweedledee, though she felt quite certain he would only shout out contrariwise, and so he did. You've been wrong, cried Tweedledum. The first thing in a visit is to say, How do you do, and shake hands. And here the two brothers gave each other a hug, and then they held out their two hands that were free to shake hands with her. Alice did not like shaking hands with either of them first, for fear of hurting the other one's feelings. So the best way out of the difficulty, she took hold of both hands at once. The next moment they were dancing around in a ring. This seemed quite natural, and she remembered afterwards, and she was not even surprised to hear music playing. It seemed to come from the tree under which they were dancing, and it was well done as she could make it out, by the branches rubbing one across the other like fiddles and fiddlesticks. But it certainly was funny, Alice said afterwards when she was telling her sister the history of all this, to find myself singing, Here we go round the mulberry bush. I don't know when I began it, but somehow I felt as if I'd been singing it a long time. The other two dancers were fat and very soon out of breath. 4 times run is enough for one dance, Tweedledum panted out, and they left off dancing as suddenly as they had begun. The music stopped at the same moment. Then they let go of Alice's hands and stood looking at her for a minute. There was rather an awkward pause, as Alice didn't know how to begin a conversation with people she had just been dancing with. It would never do to say, How do you do now? She said to herself. We seem to have got beyond that somehow. I hope you're not much tired, she said at last. Nohow, and thank you very much for asking, said Tweedledee. So much obliged, added Tweedledee. You like poetry? Yes, poetry. Well, some poetry, Alice said doubtfully. Would you tell me which road leads out of this wood? What shall I repeat to her, said Tweedledee, looking round at Tweedledum with great solemn eyes, and not noticing Alice's question. The Walrus and the Carpenter is the longest, Tweedledum replied, giving his brother an affectionate hug. Tweedledee began instantly. The sun was shining. Here Alice ventured to interrupt him. If it's very long, she said politely as she could, would you please tell me first which row? Tweedledee smiled gently and began again. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. It's so very rude of him, she said, to come and spoil the fun. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead, there were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year. Do you suppose, the Walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. Oh, oysters, come and walk with us, the Walrus did beseech. A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than four to give a hand to each. The oldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The oldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But four young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, they hadn't any feet. For other oysters followed them, and yet another four. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low. And all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat. For some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the carpenter, "they thanked him much for that." "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, is what we chiefly need. "Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" "It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The carpenter said nothing but cut us another slice. "I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick. And we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing, but the butter spread too thick. "I weep for you," the walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size. Holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes, "Oh, oyster," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none. And that was scarcely odd because they'd eaten every one. "I like the walrus best," said Alice, "because you see he was a little sorry for the poor oysters." "He ate more than the carpenter loaf," said Tweedledee. "You see he held his handkerchief in front so that the carpenter couldn't count how many he took, contrariwise." "That was mean," Alice said indignantly. Then I like the carpenter best, if he didn't eat so many as the walrus." "But he ate as many as he could get," said Tweedledum. This was a puzzler. After a pause, Alice began. They were both as very unpleasant characters." Here she checked herself in some alarm at hearing something that sounded to her like a puffing of a large steam engine in the wood near them, though she feared it was more likely to be a wild beast. "Are there any lions or tigers about here?" she asked timidly. "It's only the Red King snoring," said Tweedledee. "Come and look at him," the brothers cried, and they each took one of Alice's hands and led her up to where the king was sleeping. "Isn't he a lovely sight?" said Tweedledum. Alice couldn't say honestly that he was. He had a tall red nightcap on with a tassel, and he was lying crumpled up in a sort of untidy heap, and snoring loud, fit to snore his head off, as Tweedledum remarked. "I'm afraid he'll catch cold lying on the damp grass," said Alice, who was a very thoughtful little girl. "He's dreaming now," said Tweedledee. "And what do you think he's dreaming about?" Alice said, "Nobody can guess that." "Why, what about you?" Tweedledee exclaimed, clapping his hands triumphantly. "And if he left off dreaming about you, where do you suppose you'd be?" "Where I am now, of course," said Alice. "Not you," Tweedledee retorted contemptuously. "You'd be nowhere. Why, you're the only sort of thing in his dream. If the king was to awake," added Tweedledum, "you'd go out bang, just like a candle." "I shouldn't!" exclaimed Alice indignantly. "Besides, if I'm only a sort of thing in his dream, what are you, I should like to know?" "Ditto," said Tweedledum. "Ditto, ditto," cried Tweedledee. He shouted this so loud that Alice couldn't help saying, "Hush, you'll be waking him, I'm afraid, if you make so much noise." "Well, it no use your talking about waking him," said Tweedledum, "when you're you're only one of the things in his dream. You know very well you're not real." "I am real," said Alice, and began to cry. "You won't make yourself a bit realer by crying," Tweedledee remarked. "There's nothing to cry about." "If I wasn't real," Alice said, half laughing through her tears, "it all seems so ridiculous. I shouldn't be able to cry." "I hope you don't suppose those are real tears," Tweedledum interrupted in a tone of great contempt. "I know they're talking nonsense," Alice thought to herself, "and it's foolish to cry about it." So she brushed away her tears and went on as cheerfully as she could. "At any rate, I'd better be getting out of the wood, for really it's coming on very dark. Do you think it's going to rain?" Tweedledum spread a large umbrella over himself and his brother and looked up into it. "No, I don't think it is," he said. "At least, not under here, nohow. But it may rain outside." "It may if it chooses," said Tweedledee. "We've no objection contrariwise." Selfish things, thought Alice, and she was just going to say good night and leave them, when Tweedledum sprang out from under the umbrella and seized her by the wrist. "Do you see that?" he said in a voice choking with passion, and his eyes grew large and yellow all in a moment, as he pointed with a trembling finger at a small white thing lying under the tree. "It's only a rattle," Alice said, after careful examination of the little white thing. "Not a rattlesnake, you know," she added hastily, thinking that he was frightened. "Only an old rattle, quite old and broken." "I knew it was," cried Tweedledum, beginning to stamp about wildly and tear his hair. "It's spoilt, of course." Here he looked at Tweedledee, who immediately sat down on the ground and tried to hide himself under the umbrella. Alice laid her hand upon his arm and said in a soothing tone, "You needn't be so angry about an old rattle." "But it isn't old," Tweedledum cried in a greater fury than ever. "It's new, I tell you. I bought it yesterday. My nice new rattle!" And his voice rose to a perfect scream. All this time Tweedledee was trying his best to fold up with the umbrella with himself in it, which was such an extraordinary thing to do, and that it quite took off Alice's attention from the angry brother. But he couldn't quite succeed, and it ended in his rolling over, bundled up in the umbrella, with only his head out, and there he lay, opening and shutting his mouth with his large eyes, looking more like a fish than anything else, Alice thought. "Of course you agreed to have a battle," Tweedledum said in a collar tone. "I suppose so," the elder sulkily replied as he crawled out of the umbrella. "Only she must help us to dress up, you know." So the two brothers went off hand in hand into the wood, and returned in a minute with their arms full of things, such as bolsters, blankets, hearthrugs, tablecloths, dish covers, and coal scuttles. "I hope you're a good hand at pinning and tying strings," Tweedledum remarked. "Every one of these things has got to go on somehow or other." Alice said afterwards she had never seen such a fuss made about anything in all her life. The way those two bustled about, and the quantity of things they put on, and the trouble they gave her in tying strings and fastening buttons. "Really, they'll be more like bundles of old clothes than anything else by the time they're ready," she said to herself, as she arranged a bolster around the neck of Tweedledee to keep his head from being cut off, as he said. "You know," he added very gravely, "it's one of the most serious things that can possibly happen to one in a battle to get one's head cut off." Alice laughed aloud, but she managed to turn it into a cough for fear of hurting his feelings. "Do I look very pale?" said Tweedledum, coming up to have his helmet tied on. He called it a helmet, though it certainly looked much more like a saucepan. "Well, yes, a little," Alice replied gently. "I'm very brave generally," he went on in a low voice. "Only today I happen to have a headache." "And I've got a toothache," said Tweedledee, who had overheard the remark. "I'm far worse off than you." "Then you better not fight today," said Alice, thinking it a good opportunity to make peace. "We must have a bit of a fight. But I don't care about going on long," said Tweedledum. "What's the time now?" Tweedledee looked at his watch and said, "4:30. "Let's fight till 6 and then have dinner," said Tweedledum. "Very well," the other said rather sadly, "and she can watch us. Only you'd better not come very close," he added. "I generally hit everything can see when I get really excited." "And I hit everything within reach," cried Tweedledum, "whether I see it or not." Alice laughed. "You must hit the trees pretty often, I should think," she said. Tweedledum looked around him with a satisfied smile. "I don't suppose," he said, "there'll be a tree left standing for ever so far round by the time we finish." "And all about a little rattle," said Alice, still hoping to make them a little ashamed of fighting over such a trifle. "I shouldn't have minded it so much," said Tweedledum, "if it hadn't been a new one. I wish the monstrous Crow would come, thought Alice. There's only one sword, you know, Tweedledum said to his brother, but you can have the umbrella. It's quite as sharp. Only we must begin quick. It's getting dark as Kem. And darker, said Tweedledee. It was getting dark so suddenly that Alice thought there must be a thunderstorm coming. What a thick black cloud that is, she said, and how fast it comes. Why, I do believe it's got wings. It's the crow, Tweedledee cried out, or Tweedledum cried out in a shrill voice of alarm, and the two brothers took to their heels and were out of sight in a moment. Alice ran a little way into the wood and stopped under a large tree. It can never get me here, she thought. It's far too large to squeeze itself in among the trees. But I wish it would flap its wings so it makes quite a hurricane in the wood. And here somebody's shawl is being blown away. Chapter 5 Wool and Water. Once again, sorry, I'm going to take a quick sip of my coffee. She caught the shawl as she spoke and looked about for the owner. In another moment the White Queen came, running wildly through the wood, with both arms stretched out wide as if she were flying. And Alice very civilly went to meet her with the shawl. I'm very glad I happened to be in the way, Alice said, as she helped her to put on her shawl again. The White Queen only looked at her. The White Queen only looked at her in a helpless, frightened sort of way, and kept repeating something in a whisper to herself that sounded like bread and butter, bread and butter. And Alice felt if there was to be any conversation at all, she must manage it herself. So she began rather timidly. Am I addressing the White Queen? Well, yes, if you call that addressing, the Queen said. It isn't my motion of the thing at all. Alice thought it would never do to have an argument at the very beginning of their conversation. So she smiled and said, If your Majesty will only tell me the right way to begin, I'll do it as well as I can. But I don't want it to be done at all, groaned the poor Queen. I've been addressing myself for the last 2 hours. It would have been better. It would have been all the better, as it seemed to Alice, if she had got someone else to dress her. She was so dreadfully untidy. Every single thing's crooked, Alice thought to herself, and she's all over pins. May I put your shawl straight for you? She added aloud. I don't know what's the matter with it, the Queen said in a melancholy voice. It's out of temper, I think. I've pinned it here and I pinned it there, but there's no pleasing it. It can't go straight, you know, if you pin it all on one side, Alice said, as she gently put it right for her. And dear me, what a state your hair is in. The brush has got tangled in it, the Queen said with a sigh, and I lost the comb yesterday. Alice carefully released the brush and did her best to get the hair into order. Come, you look rather better now, she said after altering most of the pins. But really, you should have a lady's maid. I'm sure I'll take you with pleasure, the Queen said. 2 pence a week and jam every other day. Alice couldn't help laughing as she said, I don't want you to hire me, and I don't care for jam. It's very good jam, said the Queen. Well, I don't want any today at any rate. You couldn't have it if you did want it, the Queen said. The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today. It must come sometimes to jam today, Alice objected. No, it can't, said the Queen. It's jam every other day. Today isn't any other day, you know. I don't understand you, said Alice. It's dreadfully confusing. That's the effect of living backwards, the Queen said kindly. It always makes one a little giddy at first. Living backwards, Alice repeated in great astonishment. I never heard of such a thing. But there's one great advantage in it. That's when memory works both ways. I'm sure mine only works one way, Alice remarked. I can't remember things before they happen. It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards, the Queen remarked. What sort of things do you remember best? Alice ventured to ask. Oh, things that happened the week after next, the Queen replied in a careless tone. For instance, now, she went on, sticking a large piece of plaster band-aid on her finger as she spoke. There's the King's messenger. He's in prison now, being punished, and the trial doesn't even begin till next Wednesday. And of course the crime comes last of all. Suppose he never commits the crime, said Alice. That would be all the better, wouldn't it? The Queen said as she bound the plaster round her finger with a bit of ribbon. Alice felt there was no denying that. Of course it would be all the better, she said, but wouldn't it be all the better his being punished? You're wrong there at any rate, said the Queen. Were you ever punished? Only for faults, said Alice. And you were all the better for it, I know, the Queen said triumphantly. Yes, but then I had done the things I was punished for, said Alice. That makes all the difference. But if you hadn't done them, the Queen said, that would have been better still. Better and better and better. Her voice went higher with each better, till it got quite to a squeak at last. Alice was beginning to say, "There's a mistake somewhere," when the Queen began screaming so loud that she would have to leave the sentence unfinished. "Oh, oh, oh!" shouted the Queen, shaking her hand about as if she wanted to shake it off. "My finger's bleeding! Oh, 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 oh!" Her screams were so exactly like the whistle of a steam engine that Alice had to hold both her hands over her ears. "What is the matter?" she said, as soon as there was a chance of making herself heard. "Have you pricked your finger?" "I haven't pricked it yet," the Queen said, "but soon I shall. Oh, oh, oh!" "When do you expect to do it?" Alice asked, feeling very much inclined to laugh. "When I fasten my shawl again," the poor Queen groaned out. "The brooch will come undone directly. Oh, oh!" As she said the words, the brooch fell open, and the Queen clutched at it wildly and tried to clasp it again. "Take care!" cried Alice. "You're holding it all crooked." And she caught the brooch, but it was too late. The pin had slipped, and the Queen had pricked her finger. "That accounts for the bleeding, you see," she said to Alice with a smile. "Now you understand the way things happen here." "But why don't you scream now?" Alice asked, holding her hands ready to put over her ears again. "Why, I've done all the screaming already," said the Queen. "What would be the good of having it all over again?" By this time it was getting light. The crow must have flown away, I think. "I'm so glad it's gone. I thought it was night coming on." "I wish I could manage to be glad," the Queen said, "only I never can remember the rule. You must be very happy living in this world and being glad whenever you like." "Only it is so very lonely here," as Alice said in a melancholy voice, and the thought of her loneliness, my apologies, um, two large tears came rolling down her cheeks. "Oh, don't go on like that," cried the poor Queen, wringing her hands in despair. "Considering what a great girl you are, consider what a long way you've come today. Consider what o'clock it is. Consider anything, only don't cry." Alice could not help laughing at this, even in the midst of her tears. "Can you keep from crying by considering things?" she asked. "That's the way it's done," the Queen said with great decision. "Nobody can do two things at once, you know. Let's consider your age to begin with. How old are you?" "I'm 7.5 exactly." "You needn't say exactually," the Queen remarked. "I can believe it without that. Now I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101 5 months and a day." "I can't believe that," said Alice. "Can't you?" the Queen said in a pitying tone. "Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes." Alice laughed. There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. There goes the shawl again." The brooch had come undone as she spoke, and a sudden gust of wind blew the Queen's shawl across the little brook. The Queen spread her arms out again and went flying after it, and this time she succeeded in catching it for herself. "I've got it!" she cried in a triumphant tone. "Now you shall see me put it on again all by myself." "Then I hope your finger is better now," Alice said very politely as she crossed the little brook after the Queen. "Oh, much better!" cried the Queen, her voice raising to a squeak as she went on. "Much better, 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 The last word ended in a long bleat, so like a sheep that Alice quite started. She looked at the Queen, who seemed to have suddenly wrapped herself up in wool. Alice rubbed her eyes and looked again. She couldn't make out what had happened at all. Was she in a shop? And was it really a sheep that was sitting on the other side of the counter? Rubbishy, 'cause she could make nothing more of it. She was in a little dark shop, leaning with her elbows on the counter, and opposite to her was an old sheep, sitting in an armchair knitting, and every now and then leaving off to look through a great pair of spectacles. "What is it you want to buy?" the sheep said at last, looking up for a moment from her knitting. I don't quite know yet, Alice said very gently. I should like to look all around me first if I might. You may look in front of you and on both sides if you like, said the sheep, but you can't look all around you unless you've got eyes at the back of your head. But these, as it happened, Alice had not got, so she contented herself with turning around, looking up the shelves as she came to them. The shop seemed to be full of all manner of curious things, but the oddest part of it all was that whenever she looked hard at any shelf to make out exactly what it had on it, that particular shelf was always quite empty, though the others round it were crowded as full as they could hold. Things flow about so here, she said at last in a plaintive tone. After she had spent a minute or so vainly pursuing a large bright thing that looked sometimes like a doll and sometimes like a workbox, and was always in the shelf next above the one she was looking at, and this one is the most provoking of all. But I'll tell you what, she added as a sudden thought struck her. I'll follow it up to the very top shelf of it all. It'll puzzle it to go through the ceiling, I expect. But even this plan failed. The thing went through the ceiling as quietly as possible, as if it were quite used to it. Are you a child or a teetotum? The sheep said as she took up another pair of needles. You'll make me giddy soon if you go on turning round like that. She was now working with 14 pairs at once, and Alice couldn't help but looking at her in great astonishment. How can she knit with so many? The puzzled child thought to herself. She gets more and more like a porcupine every minute. Can you row? The sheep asked, handing her a pair of knitting needles as she spoke. Yes, a little, but not on land, and not with needles. Alice was beginning to say when suddenly the needles turned into oars in her hands, and she found they were in a little boat gliding along between banks, so there was nothing for it but to do her best. Feather, cried the sheep as she took up another pair of needles. This didn't sound like a remark that needed any answer, so Alice said nothing but pulled away. There was something very queer about the water, she thought, as every now and then the oars got fast in it, and would hardly come out again. Feather, Feather, the sheep cried again, taking more needles. You'll be catching a crab directly. A dear little crab, thought Alice. I should like that. Didn't you hear me say feather? The sheep cried, angrily taking up quite a bunch of needles. Indeed, I did, said Alice. You've said it very often and very loud. Please, where are the crabs? In the water, of course, said the sheep, sticking some of the needles into her hair, as her hands were full. Feather, I say. Why do you say feather so often? Alice asked at last, rather vexed. I'm not a bird. You are, said the sheep. You're a little goose. This offended Alice a little, so there was no more conversation for a minute or two, while the boat glided gently on, sometimes among beds of weeds, which made the oars stick fast in the water worse than ever, and sometimes under trees, but always with the same tall river banks frowning over their heads. Oh, please, there must be some scented rushes, Alice cried in a sudden transport of delight. There really are, and such beauties. You needn't say please to me about 'em, the sheep said without looking up from her knitting. I didn't put him there, and I'm not going to take him away. No, but I meant, please, may we wait and pick some? Alice pleaded, if you don't mind stopping the boat for a minute. How can I stop it? Said the sheep. If you leave off rowing, it'll stop itself. So the boat was left to drift down the stream as it would, till it glided gently in among the waving rushes, and then the little sleeves were carefully rolled up, and the little arms were plunged in elbow deep to get the rushes a good long way down before breaking them off. And for a while Alice forgot all about the sheep and the knitting as she bent over the side of the boat, with just the ends of her tangled dripping her hair of her with just the ends of her tangled hair dipping into the water, while with bright, eager eyes she caught at one bunch after another the darling scented rushes. I only hope the boat won't topple over, she said to herself. Oh, what a lovely one! Only I couldn't quite reach it, and it certainly did seem a little provoking, almost as if it happened on purpose, she thought, that though she managed to pick plenty of beautiful rushes, the boat glided there was always a more lovely one that she couldn't reach. The prettiest are always farther, she said at last with a sigh at the obstinacy of the rushes in growing so far off, as with flushed cheeks and dripping hair and hands she scrambled back into her place and began to arrange her new found treasures. What mattered it to her just then that the rushes had begun to fade and to lose all their scent and beauty from the very moment that she had picked them. Even real scented rushes, last only a very little while, and these being dream rushes melted away almost like snow as they lay in heaps at her feet. But Alice hardly noticed this. There were so many other curious things to think about. They hadn't gone much further before the blade of one of the oars got fast in the water and wouldn't come out again. So Alice explained it afterwards, and the consequence was that the handle of it caught her under the chin, and in spite of the series of little shrieks of "Oh, oh, oh!" from poor Alice, it kept her straight off the seat and down among the heaps of rushes. However, she wasn't hurt, and she was soon up again. The sheep went on with her knitting all the while, just as if nothing had happened. "That was a nice crab you caught," she remarked, as Alice got back into her place, very much relieved to find herself still in the boat. "Was it? I didn't see it," said Alice, peeping cautiously over the side of the boat into the dark water. "I wish it hadn't let go. I should so like to see a little crab take home with me." But the sheep only laughed scornfully and went on with her knitting. So I'm going to end it there. My apologies for stumbling over my words and yawning a lot. But I hope you all are enjoying the reading of Alice in Wonderland. I believe we have like 7 chapters left of the book. I did post up a poll, and it looks like we have 2 nominees. So one's Grimm's Fairy Tales, and the other is The Wizard of Oz. And it's the whole collection. It's not just one book. I was thinking of reading the whole collection because then at least we can keep going from book to book. So so please run and go vote. If it's still a tie, what I will do is I will read Grimm's Fairy Tales for my Dragon Stitch alongs. But with that said, I hope everybody has a wonderful day, a wonderful week. Um, I hope you all stay nice and warm. If you got to the end of this video, please leave me a cup, a wine glass, anything down below if possible, and I will catch you all in my next video. I love you all, my lovelies. Remember to take care of yourselves, spoil yourselves, and love yourselves. Bye.